Hello! Did that get your attention? Trumpets are really good at that, getting your attention. That's why people in the ancient world used them to mark different times of the day, to give commands and orders for cities and armies. They were useful for those kind of things. And it's trumpets that we're going to be looking at today in chapters 8 and 9 of Revelation. So the hope is that you're going to be reading this on your own throughout the week. But let's take a quick dive and explore some of the themes that are happening in these chapters right now together. So if you open up to chapter 8, I'll begin reading there. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer, with the prayers of all God's people, on the golden altar in front of the throne. The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of God's people, went up before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth. And there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also 1/3 of the night. As I watched, I heard an eagle that was flying in midair call out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blasts about to be sounded by the other 3 angels." The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke locusts came down on the earth and were given power like that of scorpions. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not allowed to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes. During those days, people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth was like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers like scorpions, and in their tails they had power to torment people for 5 months. They had a king over them, the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon. That means destroyer. The first woe is past. 2 other woes are yet to come. The 6th angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the 4 horns of the golden altar that is before God. It said to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." And the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. The horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. A third of mankind was killed by the 3 plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshipping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts. There's a lot that happens in this chapter, or these two chapters, and many of it is very scary imagery. But before we talk about what this all means, I want to talk about how we read Revelation, first of all. Now, when we read most things, we have a very clear pattern that we follow. We start at the beginning, we read, some stuff happens, we get to the middle, we read, some more stuff happens, and then there's an end point. And we finish and we put the book back on our shelf. However, when we read Revelation, there might be some confusion if we're reading it this way, where we expect there to be a linear pattern. Because if you're paying attention, when we get to the fourth, fifth, and the third trumpets, we see things about stars happening, either stars being put out, stars that are falling to earth. But if you remember, when we had gotten to the sixth seal, when the Son of Man opened, or the slain lamb opened the sixth seal, all the stars in the heavens fell to earth. So where are these stars that they're talking about? I'm going to explain a popular teaching method that rabbis at the time that this book was written had used to make sure help points get driven home. I'm going to use an example from a famous rabbi you might have heard of named Jesus of Nazareth. So Jesus of Nazareth, when he wanted to teach people about what it was like when a sinner entered God's kingdom, this is how he explained what it was like for a sinner to enter God's kingdom. He told people, well, you see, when a sinner enters God's kingdom, it's like a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and he leaves the 99 because one gets lost, and he goes out and he searches for it, and when he finds it, he celebrates. Then Jesus says, it's also like when a woman has 10 silver coins and she loses one. She searches her whole house until she finds the one. Then she invites her neighbors over for a party because she's so happy she found it. And finally, he concludes it by saying, or it's like a man who has 2 sons, and one leaves and goes away and takes his inheritance, and then he comes home and they have a party. What was happening was Jesus was telling 3 parables. They were all about the same thing. They were all about what it is like when a sinner enters God's kingdom. But they had 3 different images. Each one was different, and they each conveyed a different aspect of the character of God and how us, the audience, are supposed to respond where we can find ourselves in the story. They were all the same message, but they build upon each other to really drive home the point Jesus was saying. What we have as we read through the book of Revelation is we seem to have a similar pattern here. We have these 3 unique sets of 7 plagues. We started with the seals, now we're on the trumpets, and we're going to go into the bowls in the future. There's 7 plagues that happen in each of them. Some of them are very similar to each other, involving things in the heavens and like things of the water, things affecting people. Some things are different. The main point that the Revelation is trying to convey is that this is about the judgment of God on the earth. And it's supposed to seem very terrifying. All of these trumpets bring things that affect both the physical realm, things that we need for our life, like water, fields, etc., light, but they also affect supernatural things as well. We have creatures that are very bizarre coming out of the abyss and waging war. The spiritual realm is also bringing judgment on people. And so, that's what this passage is about. It's continuing the story. There's a narrative arc that we've been following, and this is just adding an extra layer to look at what God's judgment is going to be like. Now, one of the scariest things about this passage is the very end. If you read with me chapter 9, verse 20, we see what happens to those who survive these plagues that are brought by the trumpets. We see that it says, "The rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They continued to worship idols and demons. They continued to murder, use magic, commit sexual immorality, and thefts. They did not repent." Just like Pharaoh during the Passover, who saw the plagues of God brought, his hardness of heart was too hard, that even though these judgments were being brought and destruction and death reigned all around, their commitment to their stubbornness, to their love of self and hate of God, kept them from truly experiencing the kingdom. Now, the temptation for us is to read this and be frightened and scared that we're going to get caught up in all of these things. But if we are the people of God who have been sealed by the Lamb, we can look at the beginning of chapter 8 and see what's the cause of all these plagues and judgments. Well, in verse 3 we see that an angel goes, he takes a censer, and he gathers incense from the altar. And from chapters 4 and 5, and here we see again, the incense in God's throne room is the prayers of his people. And so the angel takes this censer filled with the prayers of God's people, and he throws it on the earth. And so it's the prayers of his people that is really what brings the trumpets and their plagues. The trumpets are a response to God's people's prayers for justice, for judgment, and for there to be righteousness to rule on earth again. So if you're part of that kingdom, you don't have anything to fear, and you can pray for God's justice to come. That's the key to unlocking chapters 8 and 9 of Revelation. I hope you learned something and had some fun too. Bye!